Most individuals are instructed a straightforward narrative about currency. Long ago, humans struggled with exchange. A farmer possessed grain but required shoes. A shoemaker possessed shoes but desired meat. Commerce was clumsy, inefficient, and awkward. So eventually, someone had a brilliant concept. Currency. Coins appeared. Commerce became easier. And civilization advanced forward. It's a clean narrative, logical, comforting, and mostly incorrect. Currency didn't emerge because exchange was inconvenient. It emerged because authority needed an instrument. And once that instrument existed, it never ceased shaping who controlled worth, labor, and aggression. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where currency, authority, and history intersect. And nothing exists as straightforward as it appears. Before currency, most human societies didn't operate on exchange at all. Inside modest communities, individuals didn't constantly negotiate transactions. They relied on recollection, responsibility, and confidence. You contributed because you belonged. You received because you were recognized. Obligations weren't documented. They were remembered. Worth wasn't abstract. It was communal. This operated remarkably well as long as society remained modest. But magnitude transforms everything. As populations expanded, villages transformed into cities. Commerce expanded beyond kin and neighbors. Strangers arrived with unfamiliar customs and zero shared history. And with them came a novel difficulty. Confidence didn't scale. Recollection broke down. Responsibility faded. Aggression became more frequent. And rulers confronted a challenge that exchange could never resolve. How do you nourish a force that doesn't recognize you? How do you tax individuals you'll never encounter again? How do you extract worth from a population spread across vast region? That's where currency enters the narrative. Not as a convenience, but as infrastructure. For worth to relocate across distance, it required a form, something durable, portable, divisible, something that could be counted without conversation and trusted without recollection. Food spoiled. Livestock wandered. Territory didn't relocate. Labor vanished the moment it was utilized. Metal resolved the difficulty. Copper, bronze, silver. These weren't selected because they were lustrous. They were selected because they behaved well under pressure. They didn't decay. They could be melted and reshaped. They could be divided into precise quantities. And most importantly, they were scarce enough to matter, but common enough to circulate. Metal didn't merely store worth. It made worth mobile. But it wasn't traders who transformed metal into currency. It was rulers. Early states in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Eastern Mediterranean didn't require currency to exchange among themselves. They required currency to command. Forces can't fight on guarantees. Soldiers don't march on goodwill. They require compensation, and compensation requires to be standardized, recognizable, and enforceable. Metal made that possible. Once states demanded taxes payable in metal, everything transformed. Individuals who once existed largely outside markets were forced into them. Subsistence became responsibility. Harvests transformed into liabilities. To obtain metal, peasants had to sell their goods, their labor, or their period. Markets didn't emerge organically. They were pulled into existence by taxation and authority. Currency didn't liberate individuals from rulers. It made rulers vastly more efficient. This is the component of monetary history that rarely makes it into textbooks. Currency wasn't neutral. It wasn't invented to help commerce flow smoothly between equals. It was designed to measure, extract, and redeploy worth at magnitude. And once worth could be extracted, it could be stored. Once it could be stored, it could be accumulated. And once it could be accumulated, it could be transformed into force. That's why early financial centers weren't marketplaces. They were temples and palaces. Priests and monarchs tracked grain, metal, and labor long before traders exchanged freely. Accounting came before coinage. Ledgers came before markets. The framework was constructed from the top down, not the bottom up. Then came the subsequent leap. Metal was beneficial, but stamped metal was revolutionary. When early states began minting coins, marking pieces of metal with official symbols, weights, and power, they weren't merely standardizing commerce. They were stamping confidence itself. A coin stated something powerful. You don't require to trust the individual handing this to you. You require to trust whoever positioned their mark on it. Power replaced relationship. In Lydia, in Greek city-states, and later in Rome, coins carried faces, gods, emblems of authority. They weren't merely economic instruments. They were political messages. Every transaction reinforced who ruled. Every compensation reminded individuals whose framework they were inside. And once rulers realized this, temptation followed quickly. If you control currency, you control how much exists. You control its purity. You control its circulation. Early governments learned that they could stretch their resources by reducing metal content, clipping edges, or issuing more coins than reserves justified. Spending became easier, outcomes were delayed. Inflation wasn't discovered in contemporary periods. It was invented the moment currency became adjustable. Prices rose, confidence weakened, soldiers demanded higher compensation. Markets adapted. And yet, the framework endured because once currency existed, societies couldn't return. The instrument was too beneficial, too powerful, too deeply embedded in how worth relocated. And this is the critical realization. Currency didn't evolve away from authority. It evolved with it. The bronze coins of ancient empires may be gone, but the reasoning they generated never departed. We still utilize standardized units. We still rely on power to define worth. We still accept abstraction in place of confidence. We still exist inside frameworks designed to relocate worth efficiently, upward, outward, and across period. The materials transformed. The motivations didn't. Once metal became currency, societies crossed a line they could never uncross. Because currency didn't merely measure worth, it reorganized conduct. When worth could be stored in metal, authority no longer depended on constant coercion. It could be accumulated quietly. Forces could be raised before conflicts began. Bureaucracies could expand even in peace period. States no longer required to extract everything simultaneously. They could smooth control over period. Currency made power patient. And patience is a form of authority. This is why monetary frameworks tend to outlast rulers. Monarchs fall, dynasties collapse, boundaries shift, but the reasoning of currency remains, quietly absorbing novel symbols and novel faces while preserving the same structure underneath. Coins once carried gods, later emperors, eventually national emblems. The imagery transformed, but the message stayed intact. Worth flows through power. As economies expanded, metal currency spread far beyond its original purpose. What began as an instrument to compensate soldiers and collect taxes became the foundation of commerce, credit, and communal hierarchy. Prosperity could now be accumulated across generations. Obligation could be recorded and enforced. Responsibilities could be transferred, and inequality could be preserved long after its original cause disappeared. This is where currency ceased being an instrument and started becoming an environment. By the period empires like Rome reached their height, currency was everywhere. Markets thrived. Commerce networks stretched across continents. Coins passed through countless hands, carrying zero recollection of who mined the metal, who was taxed to extract it, or who suffered when its worth was manipulated. Abstraction accomplished its function. The framework felt natural, invisible, inevitable, and when pressures mounted, the response was rarely to question the framework itself. Rulers debased coins not because they were ignorant, but because they were constrained. Conflicts were expensive. Administrations demanded compensation. Raising taxes risked rebellion, so worth was quietly diluted. A little less silver here, a little more coinage there. The effect wasn't immediate. Inflation crept in slowly. Confidence eroded gradually. By the period individuals felt it, the determination makers were often long gone. Nothing stayed stable framework like resolving short-term difficulties by borrowing from the future. Sound familiar? Contemporary currency no longer jingles in pockets, but it still carries the DNA of bronze and silver. Currently's currencies aren't backed by metal, but they are backed by power, responsibility, and enforcement. Taxes are still due. Obligations are still payable. Forces are still funded. Scarcity is still managed, not by nature, but by strategy. The language has become more sophisticated. Instead of debasement, we discuss about liquidity. Instead of clipping coins, we discuss about balance sheets. Instead of emperors, we possess institutions. But the underlying mechanism hasn't transformed. Currency is still designed to relocate worth efficiently through a framework constructed around authority. This doesn't make contemporary finance evil. It makes it human. The error individuals make is assuming currency evolved to be fair. It didn't. It evolved to be scalable. Fairness has perpetually been a secondary concern. Negotiated, contested, adjusted through politics and pressure. But the foundation design of currency has perpetually favored whoever controls issuance, regulations, and enforcement. That's not a conspiracy. It's history. Comprehending this transforms how you observe inflation, obligation, and financial emergency. These aren't anomalies in an otherwise perfect framework. They are features of a structure designed to manage substantial populations, substantial responsibilities, and substantial authority imbalances. When stress increases, the framework bends. Sometimes it bends quietly, sometimes it breaks loudly, but it never bends randomly. This is why financial education grounded in economic history matters. Not because it assists you predict the subsequent collapse, but because it assists you recognize the restrictions of the framework you're existing inside. It instructs you where motivations lie, who benefits from steadiness, who absorbs volatility, and why certain resolutions keep reappearing under novel designations. Genuine financial independence doesn't originate from rejecting currency or fantasizing about its disappearance. It originates from comprehending what currency was constructed to accomplish and what it was never meant to provide. Currency can relocate worth. It can store labor. It can coordinate massive frameworks. But it cannot replace judgment. It cannot guarantee fairness. And it cannot safeguard those who mistake structure for security. From exchange to bronze, from coins to digits, the narrative is consistent. Currency didn't emerge to make existence easier. It emerged to make authority portable. And once authority became portable, it reshaped everything it touched. The most dangerous assumption isn't that currency is corrupt. It's that currency is neutral. History doesn't replicate, but the reasoning it runs on rarely transforms. And once you observe that reasoning clearly, you cease asking why the framework behaves the manner it accomplishes. You start asking a better inquiry. Where do I stand inside it? If this provided you a novel perspective, hit subscribe. History possesses the answers. I'll demonstrate you where to look.